So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My pleasure to welcome you in this session within the World Resource Forum. I am Pascal Peduzzi, the director of UNEP GRID-Geneva. And this session is called The Elephant in the Extractive Room, the Neglected Value of Sand. And the reason why we selected such a provocative title is that by far sand, gravels, and crush rocks are the primary resource that is being used by extractive sector. So the amount that we are using is really, really big, really staggering. And this has not been recognized yet by member states and by the various stakeholders. So it is an issue that has been overlooked, and it is that's really under the radar screen. And so we had an expert roundtable that's here in Geneva and online from this morning and during the day to canvass the opinions of 50 experts worldwide on this issue. And tonight we will have this opportunity to bring you the stories of these people with 5 panelists that will tell their stories about sand. And you will see that it's quite a fascinating subject because it touches everything that we do on our development. So these sessions, I will start by setting the scene by telling you why sand is such a big issue and for the environment, for societal impact. And then we will continue that with a nice discussion with panelists. So when we think about sand, we are mostly talking about, well, in our imagination, it's more like these beautiful beaches with white sandy beaches. But in fact, our relationship with sand is more something like this. It's about the sand that we use for constructions, and we mix it with water, cement, and gravels, and we make concrete for all kinds of things. If you look around you, all the floors in your building, the windows, you're looking through the computer that you're looking at the moment, all of that has sand ingredient into that as one of the main ingredient of the material. So we're doing roads with sand. We're doing our cities and all the houses. We are making our main infrastructures like dams, but also bridges, tunnels, and so on. Windows and glass for continent bottles and so on. All of that is made of sand. And even our computers chips that we are using is needed a very high quality sand that is taken from very specific type of industrial sands, very clean silicate sand. And we also use sand for land reclamation. So I will show you this satellite imagery in Dubai in 2001. And this is Dubai in 2011, where with all palm trees made of sand. It's really gigantic structure that we can see from space. And also Singapore is an iconic example of land reclamation because since 1973, the country of Singapore has claimed territory on the sea and extending its territory by 23%. And we can see that through time, how the territory has expanded, taking sand from Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Vietnam, and many other of these countries. And that led to quite a lot of impact on the ground, societal impacts and environmental impacts. So the problem with sand is that we're using a very, very significant amount. I will come to this figure later on, but it is a geological process that produces sand, and it takes thousands of years to transform rocks into gravels and sands. It can be glaciers, rivers, wave erosion, and wind erosion. But all of that takes really a lot of time. So where we say that the resource is renewable in the long term, it's on the geological scale. And in fact, we are using in such a quick way that our use exceed the speed of the replenishment. So the tools that we are using now for extracting sand is really big. So we're not talking about small shovel, but we can have large impact depending where it is taken. And we see the amount that we're using, the sand is not globally reported, but there is a very tight connection between the use of cement and the use of sand. And reporting on cement is mandatory since 1990. And we have those figures. It's 4.1 billion tons of cement per year currently. And we see the correlation with between sand and cement is about 10 on the red scale is sand and the black scale is cement. It's about 10 tons of sand per 1 ton of cement. And so if we get these figures, we see that we've got adding to the construction sand, the rest of the sand, it's 50 billion tons per year, enough to build a wall of 27-meter high by 27-meter wide all around the equator every year. Or we can also use the other figures. It's 18 kilograms per day for the 7.9 billion people that we are on the planet at the moment. It is taken from static environments like quarries in land and or dynamic environments like this coastal area. You see, this is me in the Kirkener archipelago, where sand has been extracted, and that's making people more vulnerable to sea level rise and salinations of coastal aquifers. It can be taken out of rivers where it's changing the river flows. The turbidity has impact on the riverbeds, erosion, and so on. Taken out of the beach where we see that this team of trucks are taking sand. I mean, don't get me wrong, they are poor people looking for a livelihood. But imagine that beach after just 1 or 2 days of operation, there's nothing much left there. So there is a need for global governance on how we do extract sand. Sand is also taken for those giant vacuum cleaner, and there's dredging sand from the bottom of the sea. And what it does when you extract sand from those settings, you're actually sterilizing the bottom of the sea by crunching all the microorganisms, and that has impact on and on fish. What we can see in terms of trend is because of population dynamic. We know that in Asia it's been booming, but we see that Africa is coming very strongly here because the African population will double from now to 2050. So doubling is plus 1.27 billion people. And to that driver, we see that there is urbanization. So people are coming from rural environments and migrating to the city environment. And so there will be a need for building more housing in the city, more facilities, but also catching up on developments or roads and health facilities, schools, dikes, and so on. So from these three drivers, the population increase, the urbanization, migration from rural to urban, and the development, we will have a really, really big demand for sand. And this needs to be anticipated by government. So is it time to panic? Certainly not, because that will not help. It's time to rethink our consumption model. And we've been discussing today with the expert about reduction, reuse, retrofit, replace, recycled, or rethink the extracting practices. And this is time to bring some of the solution on the table to the government. And this is what we've been doing in the past. So at UNEP GRID-Geneva, we've been working on sand since 2014. We published a small report called Sand, Rivers, and One Things in 2014. And it had a lot of media attention. We then organized an expert roundtable in 2018, which led to the production of United Nations Environment report in 2019. This report supported a new resolution from member states at the United Nations Environmental Assembly, Resolution 19 on mineral resource governance, that also touched on other mineral and extractives, but for the first time gave a mandate regarding sand. Now, the IUCN in their recent World Conservation Congress put a motion that was accepted by member states for the urgent global management of marine sand and coastal sand. So this is also a second international mandate that is provided. And now today we've been discussing with experts to canvass their opinion to produce a new report that would be provided to the governments in UNEA, United Nations Environmental Assembly 5.2 in February. So eventually leading to further governance, but this is really much needed. So we try to encompass all kinds of stakeholders here. And today we want to have with you all these panelists that we are very pleased to get. So we've got 5 panelists, and I will introduce them with questions, and that's how we're going to have a nice discussion during this panel discussion. So my first guest is Mrs. Kiran Pereira, who is the founder of sandstories.org and also the author of the book Sand Stories: Surprising Truths About the Global Sand Crisis and the Quest for Sustainable Solutions. She works as a social entrepreneur to find and promote solutions to the global sand crisis. So Kiran, you've been working in research on sand a long time now. So what are some of the key considerations to bear in mind while addressing the sand challenge?
Hey, thanks, Pascal. Let me just share my screen here so it's easier to make sense of what I'm saying. Are you able to see this?
Yes, we are.
Fantastic. So, like you rightly said, I think the scale of the challenge that you've highlighted for us, definitely makes it one of the biggest sustainability challenges of the 21st century. Just the sheer volume that we extract and the diversity of end use options that we seem to have developed. It's quite striking that all these industries, many of these industries are based on this fundamental resource, and yet we don't have visibility into how it is produced and how, where it is being produced, things like that. I think it's very important when we're looking at solutions to this particular resource. It's very important to take a systems view, and to also it presents a lot of I think considerations around justice are very, very important. Social, environmental, economic justice, very important, because it can be both a common pool resource like water, where the rights are not clearly defined, or it's managed or not enforced. It can also be a private good, where if it's used, then it's not available to other users, and it's not available to provide ecosystem services. So I'm sure we'll talk about that later. So just this that I wanted to show you. Why does this matter now? Simply because the 20th century saw a 23-fold increase in natural resources used for building. So clearly, this is a trajectory that is definitely not sustainable. And given what you said, how we extract, this particular GIF comes from the work of Dr. Vera van Lancker and colleagues at the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences. So you can see here how they have mapped out the continental shelf of Belgium. And you can see it's a very, very busy place. So we might have the resource, but we may be constrained by the number of competing users. It may not actually be available for extraction. So these are things that we need to bear in mind. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kiran. So it means that we do have some resources, but they is competing for space. So that's very, very interesting. I'd like to introduce our next guest, which is Mr. Marc Guachot, who is a geographer specialized in the management of large tropical river systems, with a focus on transboundary governance, flood management, geomorphology, and resilience of delta, with more than 25 years of professional experience in Cambodia, China, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. So Marc, as a river systems expert who has worked in the Mekong Delta for many years, are current rate of extraction for riverbeds and delta sustainable?
Thank you, Pascal, for the introduction. Thank you, the organizers, for the opportunity. So yes, I see the issue of sand from a river perspective, but also from a conservation perspective. And we are losing freshwater species very fast. And the key reference document for WWF is the Living Planet Index. Freshwater is 1% of the surface of the planet, 10% of the biodiversity, and we have lost since the 1970s 84% of biodiversity abundance. So that's huge. It's twice more than what the rates in the terrestrial or the marine biomes. So we're trying to understand what are the reasons for this loss. And when you look at rivers, we have to understand the role of sediment, and this scheme is to explain how river works. So you have three zones. You have the upstream part in the mountain that erodes sediment, and the middle part of the river is like a conveyor belt. It moves the sediment downstream, and then you have the accumulation of sediment on the coasts. And one of the numerous benefits of rivers is that they create land, and a lot of the development, a lot of the land that we live on, a lot of the land where we produce food is actually created by rivers that move sediment. So there's fine sediment and there's coarser sediment. And next slide. So the rivers produce sand in a way that is very near to the production center, to the development people live and very easy to extract. And that's the reason why this sand is very valuable. But in terms of volume, total volume, the sand is a small portion of the total sediment load. Most of it is mud, silt, and clays, but about 10 to 20% is sand. This sand is extracted at very rapid rate. I take here the example of the Mekong, where I have worked and done most of my my research, and we see that this extraction rate is between 50 and 80 million tons a year of sand. And in natural state, the Mekong produces 160 million tons of sediment, of which about 20 to 25 million tons were sand. So basically, we are extracting more sand than the river produce. Next, please. Furthermore, we have the cumulative impact of hydropower that also affects basically the conveyor belt and retains the sediment upstream, and it traps preferably the coarse sediment. So we have less replenishment rate. As a result, the Mekong produces today between 3 and 5 million tons of sand, and we extract about 80 million tons. So by definition, this is not sustainable. The impacts are pretty clear. The river system is affected, and the resilience of those low-lying sedimentary coasts, where many of our cities are, where many of our people live, where our food production lies, are affected. The biodiversity that lives there is affected, so are the other users to society, and those people are more exposed to water and climate disaster as the result.
Thank you, Mark. So this is really fascinating, because it's got a really wide range of impact. Now, our next speaker is Dr. Jan Selby. So Dr. Selby has worked around the world on mineral resources and coastal and marine infrastructure development and projects for over 30 years. He's at the chartered geologist and wears many hats, one of which is serving as the Director of Sustainable Geoscience at the Sustainable Earth Institute at the University of Plymouth. Jan, very welcome. In your opinion, what's the most important thing to do as we start out the journey to the sustainable supply of sand?
Thank you, Pascal. So for me, I go back to basics, I think. And in a simple answer, it's make maps. Because I base that position on a position that if you don't understand, if you have no knowledge of a resource, then how can you manage a resource? And in many places, we lack the fundamental knowledge of a resource. So we've got to know our problem. And we need to do an audit, in my opinion. So each country needs to do its own audit. It needs to understand that its sand assets, resources that occur both in active environments, like we just heard about in perhaps fluvial environments, but also fossil environments. We need to understand that differentiation, what those resources look like, their distribution and their qualities, because quality is really important for sand. Not all sand is the same. There are certain sands that are very useful and utilized intensively, others are not useful. So there's an important differentiation to make there. And sands occur in so many different deposition environments. They occur in fluvial environments, marine environments, decomposed rock, coastal environments, aeolian environments, deserts, glacial environments, and deltas, fans, all these different environments. Actually, and you can make sand as well. You can rock make sand. So all these different elements need to be understood and essentially, I suppose, risk mapped. You need to understand these resources and then classify them in a geological sense in terms of resources reserves. So there's a formal way we can understand that both. That's classifying our understanding of it, so our confidence in the understanding of those resources. So I think for me, it's a no regrets move from any perspective whilst we talk about policy, we can talk about all sorts of different other vehicles and opportunities. There's a no regrets move to start to get that understanding, that fundamental understanding of the resource. And that resource we have to understand that resource across territories, habitats, onshore, offshore, and perhaps, break down those barriers that we are used to operating in to achieve that objective.
Thank you, Jan. And one of the areas where we see this is going to boom is Africa. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Mrs. Alinishi Yusuf, who's the Managing Director of the Makueni County Sound Conservation and Utilization Authority, an agency of the county government of Makueni in Kenya. And she has been in charge of sand matters in the county for 4 years now. So Alinishi, with your wealth of experience in natural resource management, including forestry and fisheries, water, sand, and cross-cutting issues of climate change, could you share with us how urgent is the discussion on sustainable sand management?
Thank you very much, and I'm very glad to be part of this discussion. And if you allow me to just share my screen, this will better illustrate what it means for Makueni County. For me, we are running out of time, as well as running out of sand, and especially for Makueni County and other arid and semi-arid lands, where sand mining is especially done from the dry riverbeds, and especially because a lot of us rely on water from the underground sources. Then unregulated and excessive sand harvesting directly affects the availability of water. And so this means that our rural communities that rely almost 100% on groundwater for their livelihoods, for their domestic use, are not able to do that. And so bringing back to Makueni County, where especially the low-lying areas receive a mere about 250 to 400 millimeters of rainfall per annum. This means that we are quite greatly hit by the climate change, impacts. And so sand conservation is one of the adaptation ways that we're using to make sure that the rural communities continue to have water even during the dry seasons. So one of the pictures that I'm sharing is one of the very dry riverbeds as an effect of unregulated sand harvesting. And this is that was before the enactment of the Makueni County Sand Conservation and Utilization Act in 2015. I'm happy also to show you, this is a current development in the country. This is in Nairobi City, where we have massive infrastructure development. This is an expressway that is currently ongoing. And so we have extremely high demand for sand. And this is just a small reflection of what is happening in terms of the infrastructure development, in terms of the housing, because as you mentioned earlier, Africa is going to experience a high population boom. And so that means we have to provide housing, and unfortunately, most of our houses are still built from concrete. And so we're going to continually exert more pressure on our rivers so that we continually continue feeding the construction industry. But there's some hope, because Makueni County, the only county in Kenya, has been able to legislate on sand harvesting. And since 2015, we are able to do a regulation of sand harvesting from our riverbeds. And because of this, Makueni County people are still able to enjoy water from the dry riverbeds, because after the rain season, the sand is able to retain so much water such that it's able to go through the dry season until the next rain season. This is a water sump that is built inside the sand, and water infiltrates, and then it's pumped out for people to use. So without sand, then you would not be able to get this water. And then finally, just to illustrate why it's that important to us and why it's a timely conversation, this is a picture I like to share. This is the main river that serves the capital city of the county that I come from. And this is water that is pumped from a sump again. and it's taken into a treatment plant, and the capital town of the county is supplied with clean water. And so for us, Makueni County, and especially the Astral areas, unregulated sand harvesting is a matter of livelihood. It's a matter of water availability, and generally economic development for the people. And so we must move really fast to regulate, especially harvesting from the very dynamic ecosystems like rivers, like lakes, and also the marine ecosystems.
So we see that sand is protecting the water resources.
Thank you very much.
Sure, of course, for irrigation and livelihood, of course. Thank you very much, Alinishi. And as we shift our discussion to the issue of sand extraction, I would like to call upon our next guest, who's Professor Daniel Franks, to give his input on this matter. Professor Franks is known internationally for his work on the interconnections between minerals, materials, and sustainable development, with particular focus on the role of the minerals in poverty reduction and the social and environmental change associated with mining and energy extraction. Daniel, sand miners are often described pejoratively using terms like sand mafia. In your practice, have you worked closely alongside informal, artisanal, or small-scale miners and quarry workers? And what do you believe is their role in supporting transition to sustainable sand extraction?
Thanks, Pascal. Good evening or good day to everyone. Thanks for having me involved in this really exciting panel. Ian said earlier something about that we need to map environmental systems to really understand the context in which sand is appearing in those ecosystems. I think the same is true for the social environment. The extraction or harvesting of sand happens in such a wide diversity of social circumstances that we not only need to understand that environment, but we need to work within that environment around governance, right? So mining or extraction of sand happens by large-scale companies, informal kind of businesses, all the way through to very informal and very small scale. So each of these different contexts presents a different kind of social challenge. We literally have millions of informal miners working in the sand sector, mining in rivers or mining in the terrestrial environment or mining on coastal environments, often in circumstances of poverty, but not always. And so therefore a huge livelihood issue. So I think one thing we've learned from working in sustainability in the past decades is that if we want to make progress on an environmental issue, we need to also understand the human development and livelihood aspects of that and involve the people in the change that we're looking to see. So in the debates we've been having around sustainability, unfortunately, a lot of the discourse is kind of written in a way that's really divorced from those social settings. We do see terms like sand mafia, and of course, there are circumstances where sand mining is tied up with criminal activity, but there's also very many circumstances where that's not the case. I've done work with artisanal small-scale miners in 20 countries. In all of the times that I've worked with artisanal small-scale miners, they've typically been in circumstances of disempowerment rather than being in a situation of power. So I think what we need to do is moderate our language so that it's inclusive, that we can bring large numbers of people along this journey with us. We can create a voice, an opportunity for voice and decision-making for those informal miners so that they can express their understanding of their social circumstance, their understanding of their environmental context, and how they might be able to work to transition. And then if we're to work on practice change, I think a really important part in exchange for that practice change, there's opportunities for capacity building and opportunities for business development and transformation. And so to transition the sustainability context of sand extraction, we also need to transition the social context. And so that's the thoughts I'd like to add to this discussion.
Oh, thank you. This rewording is important indeed. So thank you, Daniel. It is becoming very apparent that too many of us working on sand, this issue is multifaceted and extremely complex. And Mark, you work ties to sand issue to the discussion on climate. So what is the role of sand mining in climate adaptation?
Yeah, I'd like to look at the issue from an adaptation perspective. And And to zoom on deltas, on Asian deltas, and those are very important because they host a very large part of the population of the world, 700 millions of people, maybe 20% of the surface of the planet. So 20% of the global population, sorry. They are very important for food also. They represent about 0.5% of the area of the planet, but produce about 4% of the food. So they are 8 times more productive than the average land. They are also big reservoirs for biodiversity, freshwater biodiversity, that is again the most at risk in the stake of WWF. There are those areas that are the most affected by climate change. They are affected by sea level rise, being low-lying areas near the sea. They are affected by the change in hydrology rain patterns. They are therefore affected also by the growing intensity and frequency of extreme events like storms and typhoons. And those impacts are very real, but they are also a set of direct human activities that are affecting the resilience of the deltas and the capacity to cope with the change. As a result, the deltas are sinking and shrinking, losing elevation and losing land to the sea. And there's a wide range of reasons for this. The over-abstraction of water from the aquifers accelerate the subsidence, hydropower cuts the supply of sediment, the diking and polarization of land to intensify also affects the deposition of new sediment that compensate for subsidence. But sand mining has also a very important role in the loss of subsidence, and it's often underestimated. And the impacts are direct. Next slide, please. You have very intense erosion of the coastal front, and in places in Vietnam, it is hundreds of meters of land that are lost. So villages, infrastructure are destroyed. But that's the most visible part of the problem and not necessarily the most important. It's grave enough because people lose their land and lose their house in an area that is very densely populated on top of losing very productive land. But if you look at the problem, next slide, please, that is less visible. Sand mining has caused the incision of the riverbed of the main channel, so loss of elevation, and not marginally. In the past 20 years, in the case of the Mekong Delta, it's 2 to 3 meters. So basically more than 10 centimeters a year of loss of elevation. So if you put it in perspective of sea level rise, that is very true. It's kind of 100 times more, 2 orders of magnitude more important. And this causes the salt intrusion to go further into land, and it affects water supply. It affects the rice production because salt water is a problem when it comes into crops that are not tolerant, but also you cannot drink salt water. And often we attribute this to sea level rise and hydropower. They are in the equation. Those impacts are real, but in the terms, in the case of the Mekong Delta, the key factor in the short term is really sand mining, and often this is not factored into the consideration. So for many people, actually sand mining is an elephant in the adaptation agenda.
Thank you, Mark. Jan, I'd like to go back to you because you say about transitioning to a sustainable supply of sand. So how quickly could we make an impact on the sustainable supply of sand?
So I think this isn't a case for, it's a case for optimism. It's a case for optimism because I think there's a pool of knowledge, practices, and in some places, data out there that gives us the opportunity to upskill and develop a whole set of new sustainable practices. So I think if there is a will, if there is a common ambition, then I think we are talking in relatively short timescales. In a few years, certainly in a decade, we can see substantial change. It is my belief, and we should I think make this part of a sort of geo mission, a new geo mission, and to carry that flag, because I think this has been seen certainly in a geo sense, I think, as a sort of sideline, because there's not very much interest around it. But now it's absolutely front and center of sustainability and what's important to our world and our lives. So actually, adoption by that community as by the community as a geo mission, I think, is going to be a really important, that can create real impact in a relatively short time scale.
Yeah, what could sand resource sustainability stewardship look like? Like the Forest Stewardship Council, the Marine Stewardship Council, we got a Sand Stewardship Council.
Yes,
what do you
something like that. There could be some sort of global practice developed around that idea. I think that idea that there's developing this idea that we have a duty of care around this resource is quite an important component for me as well. And I think that in developing national stewardship roles, so there's an identified responsibility, embedding natural capital ambition into that perspective, is a new way to look at sand, and a new way for countries to, I suppose, create rapid impact in this particular context. So I think the mood is right. So the time is right for us to sort of embrace the opportunity.
Thank you, Jan, for your optimistic view. And Kieran, in your book, Sand Stories, you talk about this quest for sustainable solutions. So can you give us some of those examples of solutions that you have come across?
Absolutely. I would like to build on what Ian has said, and absolutely there's a case for optimism, because there are so many solutions being worked on across the board. Whether we talk about, of course, there's recycled concrete, and there's alternate natural building. You see a lot of innovation happening in the natural building sector, for example, in rammed earth, in construction with timber, for example, or construction with straw bales. So there's definitely, or compressed earth blocks. There are cases where people are trying to build with raw earth, because then at the end of life, traditionally what happens is we are in a linear economy. So at the end of life, buildings are simply demolished and the material is sent to landfill. And that's a problem, because as you can see, it comes at such a cost to the environment and to people. So conserving that value as far as possible, trying to use it in a circular economy. I think there's tremendous example. I found companies, for example, in Rwanda, for example, which imports many of its basic materials for construction, like cement and gypsum and things like that. There's a company that is making straw, prefabricated straw panels. These are industry certified, produced in a highly controlled environment, and using a co-product. So when you grow rice or wheat or other crops, straw is a co-product that grows, that is renewed each and every year. Often some part of it is fed to cattle, the other part of it is often a problem. You have to find ways to discard it. So finding a way to use it as a construction material, I think, is a win-win for farmers, is a win-win for companies, is a win-win for the country as a whole. So there are many different examples like this.
But we saw that urbanization is really one of the drivers, that people are migrating from rural to urban. So do you have examples of cities where this where we are moving toward more like implementing those interesting solutions you're mentioning?
Yes. So in fact, even India is trying something like this. You find that for traditional construction material, you find that the goods and services tax is traditionally at 18%. But if you're building with straw panels, like it's a green product and it upcycles a waste, then the GST, the goods and services tax, is 12% instead. So it's a kind of an incentive to encourage more people. You also find Zurich, for example, in Switzerland, which is doing phenomenal work It's made the use of recycled concrete mandatory for public buildings. So you find buildings that are being built with 98% recycled concrete. So that's fantastic. There are art museums and housing complexes and things like that. So that's a great example. You find Amsterdam, for example, where which has declared that it would like to be a fully 100% circular city by 2050. And by 2030, they're looking at reducing the amount of raw materials used by half. The last example that I would like to leave with you is France. In Paris, they have a low carbon mandate to build for the 2024 Summer Olympics. They plan to build buildings 8 stories and higher using timber. And so the Minister for Housing and Cities famously said, if it's possible for the Olympics, it should be possible for everyday normal buildings. So you find that from 2022, there's new legislation that has been passed that encourages the use of, or mandates the use of 50% material to be used to come from either timber or bio-based or geo-based sources. So you find a lot of innovation like that happening. That's exciting.
Yeah, that's why I always like you to have you as a panelist, because you're so optimistic and you bring solutions. I like to stay on solutions. And another positive change is what happened in Kenya. So when I come back to Al-Inishi, because what you've done in the Makueni County is quite unbelievable. So it quite set an example, actually. So from the Makueni County context, how has the journey through sand resources and governments been? What you have achieved is quite amazing.
Thank you very much, Pascal. So we've come from decades of unregulated and excessive sand harvesting before the enactment of the Makueni County Sand Conservation and Utilization Act in 2015. And so the many years of unregulated sand harvesting meant degradation of the rivers. We had massive degradation of infrastructure like the roads. We had, of course, with the degradation of the rivers, we had lowering levels of water availability in the rivers. We had other social issues like high school dropouts so that they can become loaders. And of course, also this came with the illegal child pregnancies because there's quick money with the boys. We had a big insecurity issue because we had something I would call a sand mafia, because we had the mighty, well-connected people who were exploiting sand resources in the county. And so for the people who are against it, then they would be, at times attacked. So there was a cartel that was like mafia-like. So this caused a lot of insecurity. And so with the advent of the act in 2015, which was preceded by a ban, a total ban on export of sand to outside the county, which is still in force. Since 2015, Makueni County has not been selling sand outside the county. And so this has drastically reduced the pressure on our sand resources. And so since 2015, of course, with the act and a dedicated institution that I work for, the Sand Authority, then the sand resources have been regulated. And so now we are able to regulate how much you can take from which part of the river, so that we also balance the competing claims of a sand. We must leave certain areas to rejuvenate. We have to leave certain areas to so that people can harvest water from that point. And so with all that, there's order. I like to call it a journey from chaos to order. So there's order, there are no more chaos, there are no more insecurity issues. The Sand Authority, which is a government agency, is able to collect levies from sand because it's a strategic resource. And so whatever is all the monies that are collected from the sale of sand, 50% of it is plowed back into restoration of degraded sites. So that is a positive thing that was not happening before the regulation. We also have a percentage that is dedicated to supporting other social issues, like even providing scholarships for the needy parts of the community. And this is something that was not being realized before regulation of the sand resources. And so it has been a journey of moving from a lot of disorder, which came with a lot of course, environmental damage, social delinquence, economic, harm, to more regulated, benefiting everybody, because there's the sediment justice narrative that people talk about now, that even if the sand is deposited in your river, the river next to you, but the sediments have been moved from way above in the hills, from far lands, and so everybody should enjoy the benefits that are accruing from these sand resources. And so with the regulation, then we're able to equitably share the resources that come from sand. And so not necessarily that just because sand has been harvested within your vicinity, that it's guaranteed that it's going to come back there. It can go somewhere else, on the hills, because that is where sand came from. And so with that, we have been able to realize a lot of results. And it has the Act provides for very robust inclusion of the community, because it creates structures at the community level, which we call sand management committees at the ward level. A ward is the lowest administrative structure within the county government. And so within every ward, we have 12-member committee that works with the authority to ensure that sites are designated, sites that require restoration are identified. There's monitoring of the sand harvesting activities, and all that has sort of brought the community on board, because moving people from an unregulated, open access kind of a resource to where it's regulated, there's need to have them included and their needs taken care of. And that there's a clear provision that 50% of what is collected is taken back to doing conservation work. This one brings everybody on board because they benefit equally. So we no longer have a few mighty, people that are collecting money from sand, sort of privatized kind of an arrangement at the expense of the bigger, the larger part of the community. So everyone now is enjoying benefits from sand. So for me, it's a journey of success. Just 5 years into implementation of this legislation, being a pioneer in the country is also something that we celebrate. And we hope that other people can learn from us, because as we manage rivers, unfortunately, if the rest of our neighbors are not doing anything, then we may not achieve a lot of results because of the interconnected nature of ecosystems. So we need to bring other people on board, and regulation is one of the places to start, especially if we're targeting the dynamic ecosystems.
Fantastic. I mean, I'm really very impressed how you come to the problems of water scarcity because of the sand being taken away from rivers, and all the associated criminality and kids dropping out of schools, and how all of that could be put into order in 5 years' time and bring to a solution that brings everybody to a better place. Absolutely fascinating example. So Alicia just provided this example of innovation in governance and how it could look like. So Daniel, it's like more than 1 o'clock in the morning down under in Australia. So thank you for staying with us. But you're doing interesting work at the University of Queensland on alternatives. So what alternatives are available to extractions of sand and gravels from natural waterways?
Yeah, thanks, Pascal. It's late here, but it's a good conversation that's keeping me awake. We talked a little bit earlier about building materials and alternative building materials. I think that's a really fruitful area to look into, especially like there's heaps of stone and mineral related alternatives like cobblestones and things like that that we've been doing for many thousands of years and are very hardy and durable. But there's also alternatives in terms of the aggregate itself, right? So aggregate's just a term that means sand and gravel sized material, right? So we're still going to need to use concrete for a whole host of different circumstances. So can we create alternatives for the aggregate that is in concrete? So we've been working on one potential solution, and that is to, when we produce metals, we essentially are crushing large amounts of rock. And when we mine that rock for that metal, it's only a very small amount of that ore that contains the metal commodity that we're looking to extract, right? So most of the leftover material is just crushed rock. So there's a potential then to use that material as a substitute for sand material. Essentially, we're crushed rock anyway in terms of creating aggregate from a quarry. It's a very similar process. So we've been looking at whether we can use a mineral processing solution to create a byproduct of sand while we're mining for other commodities. Now, sometimes that ore is kind of funky and complex geochemically, right? So it means that to extract that material and create a clean source might be challenging, but sometimes it's pretty straightforward and easy as an ore. So, for example, iron ore mining tends to be a very simple ore material. So by adding a few different processing circuits, you can extract sand in a way that is pretty similar to other crushed stones. It tends to be quite angular, so useful in a strength setting. The downside tends to be it is very fine grained because you have to crush the ore a lot to get the metal out, so you end up with a fine grained material. So nevertheless, we've been looking at this potential. There's already Vale, a major mining company, that is demonstrating this solution in real world context. The advantage is not only that you're producing an alternative for sand and offsetting sand from natural environments, but also you're producing less what's called tailings waste at the end of the mining process, right? So that also is a major sustainability challenge. We've had some tailings facility failures in recent years, and also you get other issues around groundwater contamination in front of those tailings facilities. So one of the challenges is, can we match the production of this ore sand when mining happens to the markets in which sand is being used? And so we've been doing some mapping along those lines as well. And a potential solution, one of what are going to need to be many different solutions, this multifaceted problem that is very unique in every single different local location that sand mining happens.
Thank you very much. This is amazing because really it's about circular economy. It's about turning what used to be considered as waste to product that actually can even make money potentially from it. And you're basically addressing many of the issues at the same time. So I've got many more questions. We could have talked again. Actually, we talk about this subject the entire day. So it's not limited to the question and point we could make, but it's unfortunately the end of our session here. Really, thank you for attending. Thank you to all our panelists for these brilliant supporting solutions. So round of applaudissement to them. Thank you very much. And I really hope that sand is no longer the elephant in the room that is under the screen, the radar screen, that now governments and different stakeholders are considering sand as an important topic that needs to be addressed, because it is in volume by far the biggest amount of material that is taken out after water. So and water is coming back, which is not the case of sand that is produced on a geological timescale. So thank you very much for this tiny introduction to this world of sand, and stay tuned because we will have a report coming very soon on this issue. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.